Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto and I'm a photographer. And in this video I'm going to share some tips and tricks and thoughts on how to use anamorphic lens for photography for panoramic photos. In this video I'm going to cover the gear you need, the camera settings and the post-processing needed to make these pictures look awesome. And after that I'm also going to compare some pros and cons of anamorphic method to stitching and cropping. Panoramic lenses like this 35mm T2.9 from Sirui, and by the way, this is not my lens, this is on loan from Focus Nordic. Big thanks to Focus Nordic for letting me borrow this for this video. But anyway, lenses like these are becoming more and more viable options also for panoramic photography because there are so many of these available these days. Not only from Sirui, but from many other manufacturers too, and for pretty much every camera and every sensor size, and these are not super duper expensive anymore. This lens goes for about 1400, just over 1400 euros here in Europe, but for example, Sirui's most affordable anamorphic lens goes for about 500 euros here in Europe. So the prices are pretty similar to any regular lens for your camera. All the pictures you're going to see in this video were shot on this Sirui 35mm T2.9 lens and my Sony A7 Mark IV camera. I also used the Sirui adapter on this lens for some pictures. This Sirui 35mm T2.9 is a full-frame lens, but with this adapter it'll only cover APS-C sensor. It gives wider aspect ratio but only covers APS-C sensor with the adapter. To get started, you need a camera of course, and then you need an anamorphic lens. These lenses are made or designed for movie productions, but they can be used for photography too, for panoramic photos, because these lenses will give you much wider aspect ratio than your camera's native sensor. This particular Sirui 35mm has 1.6 anamorphic ratio, and together with this adapter, the anamorphic ratio is 2. And that number basically determines how wide your panoramic picture is going to be. So the higher the number, the wider the picture, and vice versa. There are many 1.33 anamorphic lenses, and with those lenses you're not gonna get really super wide panoramic pictures, but you're still gonna get much wider pictures than your native sensor aspect ratio in your camera. But of course you can crop later in post and make your picture appear more panoramic. I'll talk a bit more about the anamorphic ratio in the post-processing section of this video. And then the camera settings, and surprise, your camera does not need any specific special settings for anamorphic panoramic photography. The picture in the viewfinder or on the screen is going to look distorted because it is squeezed in horizontally. Some cameras have anamorphic support, and in those cameras the viewfinder picture is not distorted, but you can use anamorphic lens on every camera. You don't need any kind of anamorphic support on your camera to be able to use anamorphic lens. All these anamorphic lenses are fully manual, at least to my knowledge. Manual focus and manual everything. So therefore you have to use either manual or aperture priority exposure. I used aperture priority for all my pictures in this video, and it works great. And then the shooting part. You can really use this like any normal manual focus lens, no difference at all. This kind of a combo, anamorphic lens and a camera, makes it really convenient to shoot panoramic photos, and it also makes it possible to shoot street and all kinds of decisive moments or action, which is not possible if you stitch multiple pictures together. If you shoot straight into the sun or you have strong point lights in your picture, you're gonna get that horizontal flare, and you may or may not like it, but it's one of the trademarks of an anamorphic lens, and that's also one of the reasons why so many cinematographers like to use anamorphic lenses. I'm shooting mostly at f11 to make sure everything is sharp in my pictures, and I can also use the hyperfocal distance so I don't have to focus each and every picture manually every time. And now allow me to remind you of our 2023 workshop that I'm organizing with my good friend Peter Forsgård. It's for all of you who'd like to become better photographers and better storytellers. Please do check out the link down below and sign up as soon as possible. We'd like to see you here in Helsinki in August 2023. And then the post-processing part, which is not difficult, but it is essential. Anamorphic lenses squeeze the picture horizontally, and then in post you have to stretch the picture back horizontally to its proper dimensions and appropriate aspect ratio. And you do it by multiplying the horizontal pixel count of your picture by the anamorphic number on the lens. On this lens it is 1.6. So for example, my Sony a7 Mark IV has horizontal resolution of 7008 pixels, and when I multiply that by 1.6 I'll get approximately 11,1213 pixels. So that's going to be my horizontal resolution in the final picture. But you'll only multiply the horizontal resolution, not the vertical resolution. My workflow is first to import the pictures into Lightroom, and in Lightroom I'll do the basic raw processing, and then I will stretch the picture in Photoshop. But you can do the same thing with any raw processor or any image editing application. The raw file is just like any other raw file. It just looks a bit funny because it is squeezed in horizontally. And then some thoughts on this Sirui 35mm T2.9 anamorphic lens. It is very sharp and optically quite decent and very well suitable also for photography. It looks kind of big and heavy, and it is kind of big and heavy, but it still handles really well, for example, on the Sony a7 Mark IV camera body. And by the way, this is also available for Canon RF L mount and Nikon Z mount as well. Okay, I admit that with this adapter, this combo feels kind of heavy. It's got to be over 2 kilograms altogether, the adapter, the lens and the camera, and I can really feel it in my arms when I'm walking around here. The minimum focusing distance is only 0.9 meters, so no tight close-ups with this Sirui 35mm anamorphic lens. If you like to take pictures of buildings, panoramic pictures, the distortions of this lens with or without the adapter can be quite distracting, because the horizontal and vertical distortions are not the same. Vertically they are pincushion type and horizontally they are barrel type, and those are very hard to correct in post. For example, in Lightroom, if you try to correct the horizontal distortions, you'll only enhance the vertical distortions at the same time, and vice versa. And I also tried Photoshop's liquify filter, and that can work, but it's also a lot of extra manual labor, so not very good. And as you can see in my sample pictures in this video, the distortions are not distracting in every picture, but in some pictures they can be very distracting. And the optical results, based on my experience with this combo, are about the same whether you have the adapter on the lens or not. The sharpness and everything is pretty much the same, and so are unfortunately the distortions. Now let's look at some pros and cons of each panoramic method: stitching, cropping and anamorphic lens. With stitching you can get any shape, any aspect ratio and any pixel count, and you can use any camera and any lens. but the downsides are that it's kind of slow, it's not suitable for action photography, and it requires sometimes quite a lot of post-processing too. Sometimes the post-processing is fully automatic, but sometimes it requires fine-tuning the alignment of the pictures. It's also not suitable for strong perspectives or scenes where you have elements very close to the camera and very far from the camera. Those kinds of scenes can be very tricky to photograph and then stitch later so that everything aligns perfectly. Cropping is one really easy way to create panoramic pictures. You can use any camera, any lens, and you'll only need one exposure, so it's suitable for action and street and for everything. The downside is that you're gonna lose a lot of pixels when you crop, depending on how much you crop and how wide aspect ratio you want. When you use an anamorphic lens, it's almost like opposite to cropping because you'll stretch the picture horizontally instead of cropping vertically. And anamorphic panoramic photography is very fast. You'll only need one exposure, so it's suitable for action, streets, and all kinds of photography. And you can do it with pretty much every camera as long as there is a lens available for your camera. But today, like I said already before, anamorphic lenses are widely available today and available for pretty much every camera and every sensor size. The downside is that you're gonna need a special dedicated anamorphic lens. But then again, people buy dedicated lens for specific purposes all the time, like macro, fisheye, and tilt and shift, and all kinds of special lenses. Anamorphic photography also requires a little bit of post-processing, but like I already explained in this video, it's not difficult. It's very simple step just to stretch the picture horizontally to its proper aspect ratio. I don't think there's ever gonna be a dedicated digital panoramic camera, because for casual use, stitching or the sweep panorama that you can do with some cameras and with every phone, that is good enough for casual use. And if you know what you're doing, you can do many things with stitching too. A dedicated panoramic camera would require a special sensor, special shutter. Depending on the sensor size, it might also require special lenses like medium format lenses or something. So I think it would just be too expensive and too few people would eventually buy it. And when you think back to the film days and those panoramic film cameras, they were really expensive too. So consider anamorphic lens as your dedicated panoramic accessory instead of a dedicated camera. And in this video I'm not trying to say that anamorphic lens would be somehow better than the other methods. I'm just saying it's one more option if you are into panoramic photography. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please do consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a link down below for that if you don't live in Finland. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.